Alien soldiers laugh at human legends until their war hero reveals the truth. The mess hall of the Varick 3rd Battalion was never quiet after the evening meal. Soldiers talked loud, laughed loud, and argued about everything from battle tactics to what the kitchen staff put in the protein packs. It was the one place where rank meant very little, and everyone felt free to say whatever was on their mind. Tonight the topic was humans. It had started the way most arguments started in that room. Private Das Veteran had opened his mouth. Das was tall even for a Varick, with gray-green skin and a wide jaw that seemed built specifically for making strong statements. He had a way of saying things with so much confidence that the soldiers around him always stopped to listen, even when he was completely wrong. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his heavy arms over his chest, and said it loud enough for 3 tables to hear. I am telling you, these stories humans tell about themselves are not real. Corporal Merrick looked up from his food. What stories? The war stories, the legends. Das waved a hand in the air like he was brushing away flies. I was talking to one of the liaison officers today, and he told me that human soldiers run into fire, not away from it, into it on purpose when their people are in danger. Merrick stared at him. Into fire, Merrick repeated. Into fire, Das said, and not just once. Apparently, they do it regularly, like it is a normal thing a living creature would choose to do. The table around them started reacting. Some soldiers laughed, others shook their heads. A younger private named Tor leaned forward and said, I heard something like that too. I heard they can go 2 or 3 days without sleep and still fight full combat, no rest. That is biologically impossible, Merrick said flatly. And they carry their wounded, another soldier added, even when it is dangerous, even when leaving the wounded behind would be the smarter choice. They pick them up and carry them. Das spread his hands wide as if all of this was proving his point perfectly. You see, every species does this. Every species invents legends about how strong and brave their warriors are. It is propaganda. It is what you say to make your enemies nervous and your own people feel proud. Humans are just louder about it than most. There was a lot of nodding around the table. Nobody noticed the human sitting at the far end, or if they noticed, they did not think he mattered much to the conversation. His name was Corporal Dale Whitaker, and he had been embedded with the Varick 3rd Battalion for 6 weeks now. The Joint Forces Integration Program had placed a small group of human soldiers across several Varick battalions, partly for coordination training and partly because the Coalition High Command believed that soldiers who ate and trained and worked beside each other would trust each other more in actual combat. Whether that was working was something different soldiers had different opinions about. Dale was not a physically large man. Among humans he was average. Among the Varick, who were broader and heavier by significant margin, he looked thin and almost fragile, the way a young tree looks fragile, standing beside older, thicker ones. He had brown hair that was always a little dusty, a calm face and gray eyes. That did not change much no matter what was happening around him. The Varick soldiers in the battalion had noticed early on that Dale was hard to read. He did not get visibly excited. He did not get visibly angry. He just moved through the day doing what needed doing. quiet and steady and present. Right now he was eating. He had a bowl of something the kitchen had made that was not quite right by human standards, but was close enough. And he was working through it with focus, the way he did most things. Das had noticed him. Das noticed most things even when he pretended not to. He raised his voice just slightly more, the way someone raises their voice when they want to include someone who is sitting a little far away. Whitaker, you are hearing this, yes. These legends your people tell about themselves running into fire, going 3 days without sleep, carrying the wounded under enemy guns. He paused. You actually believe any of that is true? Dale chewed, he swallowed, he set his spoon down and looked up. And when he looked across the table at Das, his expression was the same as it always was, calm, unhurried, like a man who had nowhere more important to be. I don't have to believe it, he said. I've done most of it. 1 second of silence, then the table laughed, not meanly, more the way people laugh when they think someone has said something absurd with a straight face, and the straight face itself is the funniest part. Das laughed the loudest, shaking his head because of course the human would say that. Of course he would sit there with those quiet gray eyes and say something like that without blinking. Dale did not argue, he did not explain. He picked his spoon back up and went back to eating, and after a moment the conversation moved on to something else, and the laughter faded and the mess hall went back to its normal noise, but something stayed. Merrick, who was not as loud as Das but paid closer attention to most things, had watched Dale's face when he answered. He had watched for a smirk or a flicker of performance, the small signs a person shows when they are saying something for effect rather than because they mean it. He had not seen any of those things. He had seen a man making a simple statement about his own life, the same way a farmer might say he had planted wheat, or a builder might say he had laid stone. No drama, no pride in it, just a fact being stated because it was true, and it had been asked about. Merrick did not say this out loud. Das was in a good mood, and the table was laughing, and there was no point in interrupting any of that. But later, when the meal was done and the soldiers were moving back to their quarters, Merrick looked over his shoulder once at the spot where Dale had been sitting. The human was already gone. Of course he was. At the same time, in the officer section of the compound, Commander Ureth was finishing her nightly review of battalion activity logs. She was a careful woman, not easily impressed and not easily worried, with decades of command experience that had given her a particular ability to notice small things that did not quite fit. She had received a flag on the mess hall conversation, routine monitoring of embedded personnel interactions. She read the transcript while drinking her evening tea. She read it twice. She set her cup down and pulled up the personnel file for Corporal Dale Whitaker. She started reading. She stopped smiling somewhere around the 3rd page, and by the time she reached the end, she was sitting very still with her hands flat on the desk, looking at the file the way someone looks at a thing when they realize they have been seeing it wrong. This whole time, she did not close the file. She started reading it again from the beginning. Alien soldiers laugh at human legends until their war hero reveals the truth. Commander Ureth had been in the Varric military for 31 years. She had commanded small units, large units, joint operations, and everything in between. She had met soldiers from 11 different species over the course of her career, and she believed she had a reasonable understanding of what a fighter looked like, what they were made of, and how to read what was real and what was performance when it came to their records. She read Dale Whitaker's file 3 times that night. The first time she read it quickly, the way she read most files, scanning for the key facts: age, years of service, deployment history, citations. Dale Whitaker was 31 years old. He had served for 8 years in the human military before the Joint Species Coalition was formed, 3 full combat deployments in human-only operations, then 2 more as part of the coalition's early integration programs before his current assignment with the Varick 3rd Battalion. On the first read, the numbers were notable but not shocking. Experienced soldier, long service, fine. On the second read, she slowed down and looked at the details. 2 confirmed instances of entering active fire zones to retrieve wounded soldiers, not covering their retreat from a distance, not providing support from a safer position, actually moving into the area where the shooting was happening, picking up an injured person and carrying them out. The first time, he'd have been 23 years old, the second time 26. Both times his commanding officer had filed citations. Both times the citations described him as having moved without hesitation, as if the decision had already been made before the situation even fully developed. There was a medical report from his second deployment: a hairline fracture in his left forearm sustained during a collapse of temporary fortification. The report noted that the injury had not been reported for 4 days after it occurred. His commanding officer at the time, a woman named Colonel Lucy Farrow, had written a note attached to the medical file that said Whitaker did not report the injury because he did not want to be pulled from rotation. When asked directly, he said his team was short-handed and he could still function. When I asked him to define function, he demonstrated full weapons operation and said, and I am quoting directly, that it hurt but it worked. I do not know whether to be concerned or impressed, possibly both. Ureth read that note several times. She moved to the 3rd deployment record. He had held a defensive position alone for 11 hours while the rest of his small unit was evacuated due to a breach in their route. 11 hours. The report was clinical and factual in the way military reports always were, which somehow made it stranger to read. It listed what he had done hour by hour: maintained position, redirected 3 separate attempts to advance through his sector, communicated clearly and calmly on the radio throughout, was extracted when the route was restored with no serious injuries. When asked by the debrief officer what had been going through his mind during those 11 hours, the transcript recorded his answer as, I just kept thinking about what needed to happen next. You can't think too far ahead in those situations. Just the next thing. Just the next thing. Ureth sat back in her chair and thought about the mess. She thought about Das laughing, big and certain, the way Das clears throat always was. She thought about the table, agreeing because it was easier to agree with Das than to think about it carefully. She thought about Dale Whitaker looking up from his food and saying he had done most of it, and then going back to eating and not saying another word. She thought about what it meant that he had not argued. Most soldiers, if someone laughed at Their record would argue, they would list things, they would get louder. It was natural, it was what pride looked like in most species, including the Varric. If someone said your history was a lie, you pushed back. Dale had not pushed back. He had stated a fact and returned to his meal, and there had been nothing in his face that looked like he needed anyone at that table to believe him. That bothered her more than anything else in the file. In the morning, Ureth called her second in command into her office. Lieutenant Sara was efficient and thorough, a younger officer with sharp instincts and the useful quality of not asking unnecessary questions. I want you to pull the service records for every human currently embedded across our coalition battalions, Ureth said, not summaries, full records, and not just this battalion, all the integrated units in our sector. Sara looked at her steadily. All of them, Commander. All of them. Can I ask what I'm looking for? Ureth considered how to explain what she was not sure she fully understood herself yet. Look for the things that were done quietly, she said, not the decorated actions where someone was watching and someone filed the citation because it looked impressive. Look for the things that appear inside notes, medical reports, debrief transcripts, the things their own commanding officers wrote down almost like they could not quite believe it either. Sara took the assignment without another question and left. Ureth poured herself a fresh cup of tea and stood at the window that looked out over the training yard. A group of soldiers was already out. They're doing the morning physical routine, and she could see, even from this distance, the two humans in the group keeping pace without any visible difficulty. One of them was Dale. She recognized his posture, straight, easy, not fighting the effort. She thought about Colonel Lucy Farrow's note, it hurts but it works. She thought about what it must take to feel something hurting and decide clearly and rationally that the hurt was not the most important thing happening right now. She had known Varric soldiers who could do that, soldiers who came around once in a long career, the kind that other soldiers talked about for years after. She had maybe known 5 and 31 years who had that quality in the way Dale's described it. She looked at the list of humans embedded in her sector. 12 names. She thought about Sara coming back with 12 files. She thought about the mess hall and Das and the laughter, and she felt something she did not feel often. She felt like she owed someone an apology. Not because anyone had complained, not because any rule had been broken, but because she had sat in her office the night of that mess hall conversation and read the flag and thought briefly that it was a minor social friction and nothing to concern herself with. She had not pulled the file that same night. She had waited until the next morning, and she found herself thinking with some discomfort about what else she might have been looking at wrong. She set her tea down and went to find Das Veteran, not to reprimand him, just to talk the way a commander sometimes talks to a soldier who is about to learn something important before they learn it the hard way. She wanted to be there when it happened, if she could manage it. She had a feeling it was going to happen soon. Alien soldiers laugh at human legends until their war hero reveals the truth. The field exercise was announced on a Tuesday morning, and most of the Varric soldiers received it the way soldiers always receive training orders, with mild complaint, brief acceptance, and then the quiet readying that soldiers do automatically, adjusting boots and checking gear even before the full briefing was over. Commander Ureth had designed the exercise herself, and she had been careful about how she presented it. She did not call it a test of anything. She did not frame it as a comparison. On paper, it was simply a joint coordination drill, the kind the integration program required regularly. Move through contested terrain, locate a simulated wounded unit, extract them, return to base inside the time limit. Straightforward enough that nobody would think too hard about the shape of it. She put Das Veteran in the same team as Dale Whitaker. She did not explain why. The terrain they were moving through was a stretch of broken ground about 4 km wide, full of ridges and dry gullies and loose rock that made footing unreliable. The temperature was high, not dangerously so, but the kind of heat that settled on the shoulders and made everything feel slightly heavier than it was. Varick physiology handled short, explosive movement extremely well. Long, sustained effort in high heat was harder on them. It was a known limitation, and experienced Varick soldiers managed it through pacing. The 3 humans in the group did not seem to need to manage it. Das noticed this around the 20-minute mark. He was not struggling, he was pacing well, moving efficiently, doing what he had been trained to do. But he was aware of his body in the way soldiers always become aware of their bodies during sustained physical effort. The heat on the back of his neck, the slight labor of breathing, the small cost of each step over uneven ground. He looked at Dale, who was running point about 10 m ahead of the group, and what he saw was a man who appeared to be on a casual walk, just not spending much energy on it. Das watched him for a while without saying anything, because something about it made him want to understand it rather than dismiss it, which was not his usual first instinct. They reached the extraction point at the 40-minute mark. The simulated wounded unit was there as briefed. 6 Varick soldiers lying on the ground, playing casualties, all of them heavier than any human in the group, all of them waiting with the particular, slightly bored patience of soldiers who have been asked to lie still and not help. Dale looked at them for about 3 seconds. Then he started organizing. He did not make a speech. He did not call a planning meeting. He simply started talking, clear and direct, assigning the other 2 humans to specific casualties, checking the terrain between their position and the extraction route, and then walking over to the largest Varick soldier on the ground, a man named Vesk, who outweighed him by a serious margin. "I've got you," Dale said, and crouched down. Das stepped forward. He did not mean it unkindly. He was genuinely thinking about physics, about joint mechanics, about what happened to a smaller body when it tried to move a load it was not built for. "Whitaker," he said, "your frame is not designed for that weight. You could injure yourself. There are better." "I've got him," Dale said again without irritation, without looking up already, positioning himself and beginning to move. He moved. Das stood and watched him move, and he could not find the technical explanation for it that he had been about to offer, because the explanation assumed something that was apparently not true, which was that the weight would stop him. It did not stop him, it slowed him. Dale was not fast, he was not elegant about it, he was steady and he was efficient, in a way that had nothing to do with grace and everything to do with knowing exactly what he needed to do next, and doing only that, no energy going anywhere except directly into the task. The group made the extraction route. They made the base with 4 minutes inside the time limit. When the debrief happened afterward, Ureth watched from the edge of the yard. She watched the Varric soldiers processing what had happened, the way soldiers always process unexpected things, quietly and with a certain reluctance to be the first one to say out loud what everyone was already thinking. Das sat down across from Dale in the shade of the briefing structure. He was not angry, he was not laughing. He had an expression that Ureth had learned to recognize over years of command. It was the expression of someone who had been holding a specific idea about the world and had just seen something that did not fit inside it and was not yet sure what to do about the space that left. He looked at Dale for a long time. How, he finally said. Just that one word, the way you ask a question when you are not sure there is an answer that will actually satisfy you. Dale took a drink of water. He thought about it for a moment, which Ureth appreciated because it meant he was not going to give a rehearsed answer. You stop thinking about whether you can, he said, once the decision is made. That question is over. You just think about what needs to happen. Das was quiet. That is not a physical explanation, he said. No, Dale agreed, it is not. One of the other Varric soldiers, corporal named Hevris, who had been quiet through most of the exercise, leaned over and said, but how do you make the decision that fast? In the mess hall, you said you have run into fire. How do you decide that quickly that you are going to do it? Dale looked at him. His expression was the same as always, calm and direct and without performance. I do not decide in the moment, he said. I decided a long time ago. When someone needs help and I can give it, I go. That decision is already made. When the situation happens, there is nothing to calculate. I already know what I am going to do. Hevris stared at him. Das stared at him. Ureth, at the edge of the yard, let out a slow breath through her nose. She had read that in the file. She had read the debrief transcript, where a much younger Dale had said just the next thing, and she had understood it as a stress management technique, a way of staying functional under pressure. She understood now that it was something else. It was not how he coped with hard situations. It was how he had organized his entire understanding of what he was for. She walked back to her office and sat down and thought about 31 years of command and the 5 exceptional soldiers she had known, and what it meant that she was looking possibly at a 6th, and he was sitting in the shade eating a protein pack and talking about it the way someone talks about the weather. Alien soldiers laugh at human legends until their war hero reveals the truth. Ureth did not summon Dale Whitaker to her office. Summoning implied authority being used, rank being invoked, a soldier being required to appear. She did not want that. She wanted to talk to him the way she had learned to talk to the soldiers who mattered most, which was simply and without the weight of the command structure pressing on both sides of the conversation. She found him in the equipment bay just after the evening meal, running a maintenance check on his gear. He was sitting on a low bench, methodical and quiet, working through the process the way experienced soldiers did it, not thinking about it much, because the hands knew what to do. He looked up when she came in, and he did not stand immediately, and she appreciated that. It meant he read the situation correctly, without needing it explained to him. She pulled a crate over and sat down. She had brought 2 cups of the warm drink the kitchen made that was not quite right for human taste but was closer than anything else on base. She set one in front of him. He looked at it, then at her, then picked it up. "I read your file," she said. He nodded. He did not seem surprised or uncomfortable or proud. "The arm," she said, "the fractured arm." 4 days. He set down the piece of equipment he had been holding. "The unit was short. I was still functional. It made sense to stay in rotation. Colonel Ferraro wrote that you defined functional as it hurts but it works." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of one. Lucy always had a very good memory for exact words. She also wrote that she did not know whether to be concerned or impressed. "Both seems right," he said. Ureth held her cup in both hands and looked at him steadily. In the mess hall, when Das was laughing and the table was agreeing and the legends were being called propaganda, you said one sentence and went back to your food. You did not argue. "No." "Why not?" Dale looked at the middle distance for a moment, the way he did when he was actually thinking rather than retrieving an answer. Arguing would not have done anything useful. They believed what they believed. Telling them they were wrong is not the same as showing them something different. He paused, and honestly, I was hungry. She laughed. It surprised her, and the surprise made her laugh a little more. And that felt good. She had not expected to laugh in this conversation. "Were you angry?" she asked when it settled. "A little," he said honestly. "Not at Das specifically. He doesn't know. None of them know because they have not fought beside us yet. You cannot expect people to understand something they have never seen." He turned the cup slowly in his hands. "The stories sound fake because they are extreme, but they are extreme because the situations that made them were extreme. Nobody makes the choice to run into fire because they enjoy fire. They do it because someone they care about is there. The caring is the explanation. It is not a complicated thing. It sounds simple when you say it that way. It is simple. It is just hard. Simple and easy are not the same thing." She nodded slowly. She had commanded soldiers for 31 years, and she knew that was true. But she had not heard anyone say it that plainly in a long time. "The 11 hours, she said, holding the position alone, what was that like?" He thought about it genuinely, not performing reflection, actually going back to it. "Long," he said. "It was a long 11 hours. I was not afraid the way people might think. Fear is loudest at the beginning. After a while it goes quiet because it is not useful, and your brain understands that. After fear goes quiet, what is left is just the work. What is the next thing? And then, what is the thing after that?" He paused. The hardest part was not the 11 hours. The hardest part was the first radio contact after my unit got clear, when I heard everyone was safe. That hit harder than anything that happened during. Urath looked at him. "Because it meant it had worked. Because it meant it had mattered," he said. She sat with that. Outside, the base was settling into its evening rhythm. She could hear distant voices, equipment being stored, the low sounds of a military installation moving. From the active hours to the quieter ones, the light in the equipment bay was practical and flat, and it made everything look very clear and very close. My second-in-command finished pulling the records, she said, the full records for all embedded humans in our sector. Dale waited. I spent 2 hours reading them this afternoon, she said. There are 12 of you here. Not one of your files reads like a normal service record. I do not mean that they are all full of citations or decorated actions. Some of them are quiet records, almost unremarkable on the surface. She looked at him. But in the notes, in the side documents, in the things the commanding officers wrote when they were just trying to record what had happened accurately, there is something in all of them. What kind of something? He asked. She thought about how to say it. The thing you described, the decision already being made, the work continuing past the point where it should reasonably continue, the not mentioning the injury because the team needed you operational. She paused. I read a file about a human named Pete Calloway who was embedded with the 6th. He gave his water ration to a wounded Varric soldier during a 6-hour wait for extraction in high heat without telling anyone he had done it until the medic noted he was dehydrated on arrival. Dale nodded, unsurprised. That is Pete, he said simply. Is that normal, she asked, among humans? He was quiet for a moment. Not everyone, he said. Not all of us are the same. But the ones who end up staying in service for a long time, the ones who keep choosing to be in situations like this when they could be somewhere easier. He shrugged lightly. Yes, that is fairly normal for that kind of person. Ureth set her cup down. We laughed, she said. It was not an excuse. It was not quite an apology. It was just a fact she was putting on the table between them, clearly and without softening it. Dale looked at her. I know, he said. I should have looked at your file sooner. You looked at it, he said. That is what matters. He stood as well this time, and they looked at each other in the flat light of the equipment bay. 2 soldiers from 2 very different species who had arrived by different roads at the same understanding of what it meant to carry something heavy without making it anyone else's problem. Thank you for the drink, he said. Thank you for the conversation, she said. She walked back to her office, and she did not feel like she owed anyone an apology anymore. She felt something more useful than that. She felt ready to make sure her battalion understood what was standing beside them. She thought that was going to happen soon. She thought, in fact, it was going to happen very soon. She just did not know yet that it would not be a conversation. It would be something that nobody could laugh at or argue with or dismiss as a legend told to make enemies nervous. It would be real, and it would happen fast, and it would settle the question in a way that no file and no debrief and no training exercise ever fully could. She went to sleep that night thinking about Pete Calloway giving away his water. She woke up the next morning to the sound of the emergency channel opening. Alien soldiers laugh at human legends until their war hero reveals the truth. The radio call came in at 3:40, and it came in broken. Ureth was at the command station within 90 seconds of the first alert, still pulling her jacket closed, and the Officer on duty was already mapping the position on the display when she arrived. The signal was fragmenting, cutting and out, but the core of what it was saying was clear enough. Border Patrol, 6 soldiers, 4 Varak, and 2 humans, ambushed from the eastern ridge while moving through the lower valley sector, Kaith forces. The angle of attack was unexpected. Direction: the patrol route had been assessed as low risk based on 3 months of pattern data. The assessment had been wrong. 2 Varak soldiers down, extraction route blocked, position not secure. The 2 humans in the unit were Sergeant Pete Calloway and Private Dana Holt. Pete was 34, 11 years of service, the same one whose file Yereth had read the previous afternoon, the one who had given his water away. Dana was 26, 4 years in, quiet in her daily interactions on base, the kind of soldier who listened more than she talked and had a reputation among the other embedded humans for being extremely steady under pressure. Yereth's battalion was 6 minutes out. She ordered the extraction force moving before the transmission finished. In the second vehicle, Das Veteran rode with his weapon across his knees and his jaw set tight. He had heard the names. He had been in the briefing room for the patrol rotation the previous morning, and he remembered who had gone out on that route. He did not think about the mess hall. He did not think about legends or propaganda or any of it. He thought about the valley and the eastern ridge and the 2 Varak soldiers who were down, and he thought about getting there. 6 minutes, they arrived in 5. Ambush site was at the far edge of the lower valley where the ground flattened out before rising again toward the ridge. The Kaith force had already pulled back. Yereth noted that immediately as the vehicles came to a stop, the attack had broken. She did not know why yet, but it had. She stepped out and took in the scene. The 2 Varak soldiers who had returned fire were standing near the eastern edge of the position. They looked shaken but uninjured. They were both staring at something behind them, and their expressions were strange, a mix of things Yereth recognized from combat: relief and adrenaline, and the slightly distant look of people whose minds had not fully caught up with what their eyes had seen. She turned. Pete Calloway was leaning against a large rock about 20 m back on the sheltered side, away from the ridgeline. His left shoulder had a field dressing on it, applied tightly and efficiently. There was blood on the dressing, but it was not fresh bleeding. He had a radio in one hand and was giving a status update to someone on the other end in a voice that was calm and clear and organized, the way a person talks when the situation is managed and they are communicating facts rather than reacting to events. Dana Holt was on the ground beside one of the wounded Varak soldiers. The soldier's name was Grevak, corporal from the 2nd unit, broad and heavy. Dana was small beside him. She had her jacket off and was using it as a pressure pack against a wound in his side, both hands pressing down. Steady and firm, she was not looking around. She was not reacting to the arriving vehicles. She was looking at Grevak's face and talking to him in a low, even voice, the kind of voice you use to keep someone present, to keep them from going somewhere far away in their own mind. When Yereth reached her, Dana looked up. For exactly 1 second, he needs a real medic, she said. I have held the bleed, but it needs proper sealing. The wound is deeper on the left side than the entry suggested. That was all. No drama in it, no announcement of what she had done or how long she had been doing it, just the next necessary piece of information delivered to the person who could act on it. Yereth had her medic down beside Grevek. Within 10 seconds, she stood up and looked around the position. She looked at the ground. She could read a combat scene the way she could read a map, and what the ground told her was this. When the ambush had started and the two Varric soldiers went down, Pete and Dana had not moved backward, they had moved the wounded soldiers backward toward cover under fire. The marks in the dirt and the positions of the bodies and the angle of the cover were clear about what had happened and in what order. The Kaith had pulled back because the position had not broken, because two humans had held it. Das came to stand beside her. He was reading the ground the same way she was, because he was a good soldier, and that was what good soldiers did. And she could see on his face that he was reaching the same understanding she had reached. He was quiet for a long time. Pete ended his radio call and lowered the device. He looked across at Das, and there was nothing in his face that said anything about any of it. He was not making a point. He was not waiting for acknowledgement. He was just a tired man with a bandaged shoulder, leaning against a rock at 400 in the morning, waiting to be told what happened next. Das walked over to him. He stood in front of Pete for a moment without saying anything, and Pete looked at him steadily and waited. In the mess hall, Das said finally. His voice was not the same as the mess hall voice, the big certain sound he used when he was holding a position on a topic. This was quieter. I said the legends were stories, propaganda, things you tell to make enemies afraid and your own people proud. Pete nodded. I was wrong, Das said. Pete was quiet for a moment, then he said, legends are always a little bigger than the truth. That is just how stories work. Das looked at the ground. He looked at the marks in the dirt. He looked at Dana, still kneeling beside Grevek, still talking to him in that low, steady voice, even while the medics worked, because she had decided that was still useful, and so she was still doing it. He looked back at Pete. No, he said. I think in your case they are a little smaller. Pete did not argue with that. Later, when the extraction was complete, and the wounded were loaded and the vehicles were heading back to base in the early gray light of morning, Yereth sat in the command vehicle and thought about the conversation in the equipment bay. She thought about what Dale had said. The decision already made, the caring being the explanation, simple but hard. She thought about Dana Holt pressing her jacket against a wound for however long she had been pressing it in the dark, under fire, with no way to know when help was coming, just holding on because she had decided to hold on. She thought about Pete's voice on the radio, calm and organized, giving facts. She thought about how neither of them had said a word in the mess hall on the night Das was laughing. How all of them had been quiet like that, sitting with their food, hearing themselves called legends, hearing the word used like it meant something false. And none of them had argued because they had understood the way people who have actually done hard things understand. That arguing was not the answer, that the answer was just doing the next thing. Back at the base, Dale Whitaker heard what had happened in the valley before breakfast. He heard it from Merak, who told it straight and factually, the way the ground had told it to anyone who could read it. Dale listened to all of it without Interrupting. When Merrick finished, Dale nodded once. He looked out the mess hall window at the training yard in the morning light. Quiet and still at this hour, the whole base still settling back from the alert. He did not say anything about Pete or Dana. He did not say anything about the mess hall or the legends or being right or Das being wrong. He drank his coffee. He thought about his team. He was glad they were coming home.